another poor woman in borrowed clothes, standing alone before the court. He mocked her words, questioned her intelligence, smiled when the room laughed. What he didn't know was that the man sitting silently in the back row, head lowered, hands clasped, had built an empire on patience, and he never forgot a name. The Hillcrest County Courthouse stood at the corner of Main and Crawford, like a monument to everything Emma Sullivan feared about the system. She had arrived 45 minutes early. Not because she was eager, no, because she had learned from 29 years of being poor that early meant invisible. Early meant you could find the bathroom, check your reflection, smooth down the flyaway hairs that betrayed your nerves. Early meant you could sit in a corner and breathe. The building itself seemed designed to intimidate. Marble floors that echoed every footstep. Ceilings so high they swallowed sound. Portraits of men in black robes lining the walls, their painted eyes following her as she walked. Emma clutched the manila folder against her chest like a shield. Inside were 3 years of her life, reduced to paper, bank statements showing the careful mathematics of poverty. Medical bills from her mother's illness, receipts for every single payment she had made on the small business loan that was now threatening to consume everything she had built. The loan had seemed so simple 3 years ago. $20,000 to expand her small cleaning service. She had started the business with nothing, a mop, a bucket, and a willingness to scrub other people's floors at hours when most people were sleeping. She had built it, client by client, referral by referral, into something that almost resembled stability. The bank had smiled when they approved her. The interest rate had seemed manageable. The payment schedule had looked like something she could handle. What they hadn't told her about was the balloon clause buried on page 47. What they hadn't explained was how a single missed payment, just one, during the month her mother's hospice bills had devoured every dollar she had, would trigger a cascade of penalties that doubled, then tripled, what she owed. Now the bank wanted everything: her business, her equipment, the small savings account. She had been building for her daughter's future, and today, in courtroom 4B, a judge would decide whether they could take it. Emma found an empty bench near the back of the courthouse lobby and sat down carefully, smoothing the fabric of her dress. The dress belonged to her neighbor, Karen, a simple navy blue shift that Emma had altered herself to fit her smaller frame. Her shoes were her own, but they were old, the heels worn down unevenly from years of hard floors. She opened the folder and reviewed her notes for the 100th time. Her handwriting filled the margins of every document, questions she wanted to ask, points she wanted to make, arguments she had practiced in front of her bathroom mirror until the words stopped trembling on her tongue. She had no lawyer. She had called 7 of them. 3 never returned her calls. 2 said her case wasn't worth their time. 1 had offered to take it for a flat fee of $8,000, money that might as well have been $8 million. The last one, a young woman at a legal aid clinic, had seemed genuinely sorry. "We're overloaded," she had said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "I can give you some resources, some guides for representing yourself, but I can't take your case. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." So Emma had done what she had always done. She had taught herself. She had spent nights at the public library, reading legal guides until the librarians gently reminded her that they were closing. She had watched YouTube videos about civil procedure. She had memorized the names of relevant statutes and wrote them down phonetically so she wouldn't mispronounce them in court. She had done everything right. And still, sitting in this marble lobby, she felt like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. At 8:47 a.m., a man entered the courthouse. Emma didn't notice him at first. She was too focused on her notes, too lost in the rhythm of her own anxiety. But something about the quality of silence that followed his entrance made her look up. He was tall, but not imposingly so. Mid-40s, with dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. He wore a simple gray jacket over a white shirt, no tie. His shoes were unremarkable, brown leather, well worn. Nothing about him screamed wealth or power. And yet, the security guard straightened slightly as he passed through the metal detector. The clerk at the information desk looked up, then quickly looked away. A lawyer in an expensive suit stepped aside to let him pass, even though there was plenty of room in the hallway. It was subtle, almost invisible. But Emma noticed. She noticed because she had spent her entire life being invisible herself, and she had learned to recognize the shape of power, even when it wore humble clothes. The man walked to a bench on the opposite side of the lobby and sat down. He didn't open a phone. He didn't read a newspaper. He simply sat, hands clasped loosely in his lap, and watched the people moving through the space with the patient stillness of a man who had learned that time was something you used, not something that used you. Their eyes met for a moment. Emma felt a strange flutter in her chest, not fear, exactly, but recognition, as if she were looking at a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit the picture around it. Then he looked away and she returned to her notes, and the moment passed. At 9:15 a.m., Emma entered courtroom 4B. The room was smaller than she had expected, maybe 30 seats arranged in rows behind a low wooden barrier. The judge's bench dominated the far wall, elevated on a platform that forced everyone below to look up. She found a seat in the second row and waited. Other people filtered in, a young man in a suit who seemed to be representing the bank, an older woman with a court reporter's machine, a few observers whose purpose Emma couldn't determine, and the man from the lobby. He entered last, moving to a seat in the very back row near the door. He sat with that same patient stillness, his face revealing nothing. Emma wondered briefly who he was. A witness for another case? A law student observing proceedings? Someone waiting for his own appointment with justice? She didn't have time to wonder long. At 9:30 exactly, a door behind the bench opened, and Judge Harold Whitmore entered the courtroom. "All rise," the bailiff called. Emma stood, and in that moment, looking at the man who would decide her fate, she felt the last of her hope begin to crumble. Judge Whitmore was in his late 50s, with a face that seemed designed for disapproval. Heavy jowls, small eyes beneath thick brows, a mouth that naturally curved downward, as if gravity had spent decades pulling it toward contempt. He sat heavily in his chair and surveyed the courtroom with the expression of a man who had already decided that his time was being wasted. "Be seated," he said. His voice was flat, bored. "What's first?" The clerk handed him a folder. "Sullivan versus First Regional Bank, civil matter regarding a small business loan." The judge glanced at the folder, then looked up at the courtroom. His gaze swept past Emma, without pause, landing on the young man in the suit. "Counsel for the bank." "Yes, Your Honor. David Chen, representing First Regional." The judge nodded, something that might have been approval crossing his face. Then his eyes finally landed on Emma. "And you are?" Emma stood, gripping the edge of the barrier for support. "Emma Sullivan, Your Honor. I'm representing myself." She heard it then, a soft ripple of something through the courtroom. Not quite laughter. More like the collective exhale of people who had already decided what was going to happen. Judge Whitmore's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, something that looked like satisfaction. "Pro se," he said, making the Latin phrase sound like a diagnosis. "Wonderful. Let's get this over with. Then, bank, present your case." David Chen was good. Emma had to admit that, even as she watched him systematically dismantle everything she had built. He spoke clearly and confidently, laying out the bank's position with the precision of a surgeon. Emma had borrowed money. Emma had agreed to terms. Emma had failed to meet those terms. The bank was entitled to recover its losses. He produced documents that Emma had signed, her own handwriting damning her from the past. He referenced clauses she barely remembered reading, buried in the avalanche of fine print that had accompanied her loan application. And through it all, Judge Whitmore nodded. He asked clarifying questions that helped Chen's arguments. He smiled when Chen made a particularly effective point. He looked at Emma the way someone looks at a fly buzzing against a window, a minor annoyance that would soon resolve itself. When Chen finished, the judge turned to Emma with an expression of exaggerated patience. "Mrs. Sullivan, Miss," Emma corrected automatically, then immediately regretted it. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. "Miss Sullivan, your response." Emma stood. Her legs felt weak. Her hands were shaking so badly that the papers in her grip rustled audibly. But she had practiced this. She had prepared. "Your Honor," she began. I don't dispute that I took out a loan or that I fell behind on payments, but I believe the terms of that loan were predatory and that the bank failed to properly disclose the consequences of the balloon clause. She paused, waiting for some acknowledgement. The judge simply stared at her. She pressed on. When I took out this loan, the bank representative assured me that the payments would remain consistent. She never mentioned that missing a single payment would trigger penalties that would double what I owed. If I had known, Miss Sullivan, the judge's voice cut through hers like a blade. Yes, Your Honor. Did you sign the loan? Agreement? Emma's throat tightened. Yes, but did you read the loan agreement before you signed it? I, I tried, but it was over 60 pages and the language was... Did you read it? Yes. And did you make the payments you agreed to make? I made most of them. All of them except one, when my mother was... So you didn't make all the payments? No, but then what exactly are we doing here? Emma felt the words die in her throat. The judge leaned back in his chair, and for the first time, something that looked like amusement crossed his face. Miss Sullivan, I've been on this bench for 22 years. Do you know how many people have stood where you're standing, claiming that they didn't understand what they signed, that they were tricked, that it wasn't their fault? He didn't wait for an answer. Hundreds, maybe thousands. And do you know what they all have in common? He leaned forward, and his voice dropped to something that was almost a whisper. They all signed anyway. They all took the money. They all spent it on whatever they wanted to spend it on, and then when the bill came due, they all stood in front of me with their excuses and their complaints and their sad stories about sick mothers and hard times. A soft laugh rippled through the courtroom. Emma felt heat flooding her face. Her eyes were burning. She would not cry. She would not. Your Honor, she tried again. I'm not making excuses. I'm trying to explain. Explain what? That you didn't understand basic contract law? That you thought you could borrow $20,000 and only pay back what was convenient? His voice was rising now, carrying a sharp edge of contempt. Let me explain something to you, Miss Sullivan. This court doesn't exist to save people from their own decisions. You signed a contract. You broke that contract. And now you want me to feel sorry for you because life is hard? He shook his head. Life is hard for everyone. The difference is that some people take responsibility for their choices, and some people look for someone else to blame. The laugh this time was louder, more open. Emma looked around the courtroom and saw faces that ranged from amusement to pity. The young bank lawyer was trying to hide a smile. The clerk was looking anywhere but at her, and in the back row, the man in the gray jacket sat perfectly still. His face revealed nothing. But his hands were no longer loosely clasped. They were gripping the edge of the bench so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. Emma tried again. She tried to explain about the balloon clause, how it had been buried in language designed to confuse, how the bank representative had glossed over it during their meeting. Judge Whitmore interrupted her. Are you suggesting that the bank committed fraud? I'm suggesting that their practices were, because that's a serious accusation, Miss Sullivan, and making accusations without evidence is what some people might call defamation. His voice was silky now, almost gentle, the way a cat might be gentle with a mouse it had already caught. I'm not accusing anyone of... Do you have any evidence that the bank misrepresented the terms of your loan? Any recordings? Any witnesses? Anything at all? Emma's throat was so tight she could barely speak. I have my memory of the conversation. Judge Whitmore smiled. It was a terrible smile. The smile of a man who had found exactly the moment of weakness he had been looking for. Your memory, he repeated. Well, that's certainly compelling. Perhaps we should just take everyone's memory as evidence. Think how efficient our justice system would be. The laughter this time was loud and unrestrained. Emma felt something breaking inside her. The careful armor she had constructed, the walls she had built to survive this moment, they were crumbling. She looked down at her notes, the careful handwriting blurring through the tears she was refusing to let fall. Your Honor, she said, her voice cracking. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for a chance to present the full context of my situation The regulations regarding disclosure requirements for consumer loans state that, Miss Sullivan, the judge's voice was heavy with exasperation. Do not attempt to lecture me on regulations. I was practicing law before you were born. I know what the regulations say, and I know that none of them require me to rescue you from your own poor decisions. He picked up his gavel. I've heard enough. This court finds in favor of First Regional Bank. The defendant is ordered to repay the full balance of the loan, plus accrued interest and penalties, totaling. He glanced at a paper. $63,412. Failure to comply within 90 days will result in seizure of assets, as outlined in the original agreement. The gavel came down. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Emma stood frozen. $63,000. It might as well have been 63 million. Everything she had, everything she had worked for. The business she had built from nothing. The savings for her daughter's future, gone. All of it gone. Next case, the judge said, already looking at his clerk for another folder. And that was when Emma made her mistake. This isn't right. The words escaped before she could stop them. The judge's head snapped up. His eyes narrowed. Excuse me. Emma knew she should stop. She knew she should thank the court and walk away and figure out how to survive this crushing defeat. But something had broken inside her. The part of her that had learned to be quiet, to be small, to accept whatever scraps the world threw her way. That part was silent. This isn't right, she repeated, her voice stronger now. I came here in good faith. I prepared my case. I followed every rule I could find about how to represent myself, and you haven't listened to a single word I've said. The courtroom had gone silent. Even the bank lawyer had stopped smiling. You didn't read my documents. You didn't ask me any questions. You just decided, the moment you saw I didn't have a lawyer, that I was going to lose. The judge's face had gone red. Miss Sullivan, you are dangerously close to contempt of court. And you've been treating me with contempt since I walked in the door. The words hung in the air. Judge Whitmore leaned forward, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet and deadly. Do you know what I can do to you, right here, right now? I can find you in contempt. I can fine you. I can have you removed from this courtroom in handcuffs. I can make a note in your file that follows you for the rest of your life. He smiled, that terrible smile again. Is that what you want? Is that what you came here for? To make a scene? To play the victim? Emma's hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking, but she didn't look away. I came here for justice, she said. I see now that I came to the wrong place. The judge's gavel came down again, harder this time, with a violence that made several people in the courtroom flinch. Contempt of court. $500, payable within 30 days. And consider yourself lucky that I'm in a generous mood. He looked at the bailiff. Remove this woman from my courtroom. In the back row, the man in the gray jacket stood. His movement was slow and unhurried, but it drew the eye nonetheless. There was something about the way he moved, an economy of motion, a contained power, that seemed to change the quality of air in the room. He walked to the end of his row and stopped at the aisle. For a long moment, he simply stood there, his eyes fixed on the judge. Judge Whitmore noticed. His mouth opened, as if to say something, to challenge this stranger's audacity, perhaps, or to demand his removal. But the words never came. Because something in the man's eyes, something cold and patient and absolutely certain, made the judge's voice die in his throat. The man turned and walked out of the courtroom. He didn't look back. Emma saw none of this. She was already being guided toward the door by the bailiff. Her vision blurred by tears, she was no longer able to stop. She had lost everything. She didn't know that in the back of the room, the last person to leave had slipped a small notepad from his pocket and written down a name. Harold Whitmore. She didn't know that this name would soon be added to a list, a very short list. A list of people who had made a powerful man feel something he almost never felt. Rage. The man's name was Daniel Carter. Very few people knew that name. Fewer still knew what it meant. In certain circles, the kind of circles that operated in the shadows of legitimate business, The kind of circles where loyalty was currency and silence was survival, was known simply as the patient one. The nickname had been earned across 3 decades of careful, methodical work. Daniel Carter did not shout. He did not threaten. He did not make demands. He waited. He watched. And then, when the time was right, he acted, with a precision that left his enemies wondering how, exactly, their carefully constructed lives had crumbled so completely. He had built his empire the same way, starting as a teenager, in a neighborhood that had been forgotten by everyone except the drug dealers and the debt collectors. Daniel had learned early that power was not about violence. Violence was cheap. Violence was easy. Anyone could pull a trigger or throw a punch. True power was about leverage. It was about knowing things, about being owed favors by the right people, about building a network of relationships so intricate and so valuable that harming you became more expensive than helping you. By the time he was 30, Daniel controlled construction, contracts across 3 states. By 40, his influence extended into shipping, real estate, and, though nothing could ever be proven in a court of law, the kinds of services that existed outside the formal economy. He had lawyers who made problems disappear. Accountants, even federal investigators gave up trying to follow it. Associates in every major city who owed him enough that a single phone call could change the trajectory of their lives. And through it all, he had remained invisible. No photographs in newspapers, no profiles in business magazines, no social media presence, no interviews, no public speeches. He was a ghost who happened to own half the city, and Emma Sullivan was his wife. They had met 5 years ago. Daniel had been sitting in a coffee shop near his downtown office, reviewing documents that would have fascinated federal prosecutors if they had ever been able to get their hands on them. It was late, past midnight, and the shop was nearly empty. Emma had come in carrying a bucket and a mop. She was there to clean. Daniel had been so absorbed in his work that he hadn't even noticed the previous cleaning person, a man who had quit 2 weeks earlier, apparently unable to handle the hours. But he noticed Emma. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because there was anything unusual about her appearance. She was wearing faded jeans and a worn sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. He noticed her because of the way she worked. There was a precision to her movements, a deliberate efficiency. She moved through the space as if she had mapped it in her mind, calculating the most effective route from one task to the next. And when she thought no one was watching, she hummed, softly, under her breath. An old song Daniel recognized from his childhood, something his grandmother used to hum while she cooked Sunday dinner. He watched her for almost an hour. When she finally noticed him, really noticed him, not as a piece of furniture to clean around, but as a person sitting alone at midnight with papers spread across his table, she froze. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I can come back later." Daniel smiled. It was a real smile, the kind he rarely showed anyone. "You're not disturbing me." The singing was nice. She blushed. "You heard that? My grandmother used to sing the same song." Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, a tentative connection. "I'm Daniel," he said. "Emma." She went back to her cleaning, but now there was a self-consciousness to her movements. And Daniel found himself watching her, instead of his documents, intrigued by this woman who worked with such quiet dignity in a job that most people would have found humiliating. They talked more the next night, and the night after that. Within a month, Daniel knew her story. The father who had abandoned the family when she was young, the mother she had supported through years of illness, the business she was slowly building, one client at a time. He knew her strength, her pride, her stubborn refusal to accept help from anyone, even from him, when he offered to invest in her business. "I need to do this myself," she had said. "If I can't build it on my own, then it's not really mine." He had loved her for that. He had loved her so much that he had done something he had never done before. He had told her the truth, not all of it. There were things she didn't need to know, things that would only burden her conscience, but enough. Enough for her to understand that the man who wanted to spend his life with her was not the simple businessman he appeared to be. She had listened, she had asked questions, and then, after a long silence, She had looked at him with those dark eyes that saw everything. "I know who you are," she said. "I've always known. You can't clean buildings in this city for 10 years and not hear things. And I've seen what you do, not the details, but the shape of it. You help people who have nowhere else to go. You punish people who think they're untouchable. You've never hurt anyone who didn't deserve it." She reached across the table and took his hand. "My mother always said that God works in mysterious ways. Maybe this is one of them. Maybe you're exactly what you're supposed to be." They were married 3 months later. A small ceremony. No guests except her mother, who was too ill to understand what was happening but smiled anyway. No announcements, no record of the marriage that could be easily found. Emma kept her name, she kept her business, she kept her independence, and Daniel kept his promise, the only promise that had ever truly mattered to him. He would protect her, he would support her, and he would never, ever let his world touch hers. The day of the trial, Daniel had not intended to be there. Emma had asked him to stay home. She had insisted, actually, with that stubborn pride he loved so much. "This is my problem," she had said. "My mistake. I need to fix it myself." He had agreed. He had kissed her forehead and watched her leave in her borrowed dress, her folder of documents clutched against her chest. And then he had followed her, not because he didn't trust her, not because he thought she couldn't handle it, but because something in his gut, that instinct that had kept him alive through 30 years of dangerous work, had told him that she shouldn't be alone. He had arrived early, found a seat in the back row, and watched. He had watched her enter the courtroom with her careful dignity. He had watched the judge dismiss her before she even opened her mouth. He had watched the mocking smiles, the cruel laughter, the systematic humiliation of the woman he loved, and something inside him had begun to burn. Daniel Carter had faced enemies who wanted him dead. He had negotiated with men who would have tortured their own mothers for profit. He had built his empire by staying calm when others panicked, by thinking clearly when others acted rashly. But sitting in that courtroom, watching a petty tyrant in a black robe tear strips from his wife's dignity for the entertainment of strangers, he had never wanted to hurt someone so badly in his life. His hands had gripped the bench until his knuckles went white. His jaw had clenched so tightly that his teeth ached. Every instinct screamed at him to stand up, to walk to the front of that courtroom, to make that judge understand exactly who he was dealing with. But he didn't, because Emma had asked him not to interfere, because revealing himself would put her in danger, would mark her as the wife of Daniel Carter, would make her a target for his enemies, would destroy the careful separation between their worlds. Because even now, even in the grip of rage, he knew that the right kind of justice required patience. So he sat, he watched, he memorized every word the judge said, every smile, every cruel inflection. And when it was over, when Emma was being escorted out in tears, her case dismissed, her dignity shattered, Daniel stood. He stood, and he looked at Judge Harold Whitmore, and he made sure the judge saw his face. Just for a moment, just long enough to plant a seed. Then he walked out of the courtroom, pulled out his phone, and made a call. "I need everything," he said. "Everything there is to know about a judge named Harold Whitmore. Every case he's ever ruled on, every friend he has, every enemy, every secret." He paused. "Take your time, do it right. But when you're done, I want to know him better than he knows himself." He hung up and walked out into the sunlight. Behind him, the courthouse loomed like a monument to a system that had failed the woman he loved. That system was about to discover what it meant to fail Daniel Carter. Judge Harold Whitmore went home that evening feeling quite pleased with himself. He lived in a sprawling house in the suburbs, not the wealthiest neighborhood, but respectable. The kind of place where people still believed in law and order, where they looked up to judges and trusted the system. His wife had dinner waiting, roast chicken, his favorite. She asked about his day, and he told her about a few cases, sanitized versions, of course, without the details that might have disturbed her. He didn't mention Emma Sullivan. Why would he? She was nobody, a poor woman who had gotten in over her head and then tried to blame everyone but herself. He saw people like her every day. In fact, as he settled into his leather armchair with a glass of scotch, Harold reflected that people like her were exactly why he had gone into law. Not to help them, of course, to keep them in their place. Harold Whitmore had grown up comfortable. not wealthy. His father had been a mid-level accountant, his mother, a homemaker, but comfortable enough that he had never known real want. He had gone to good schools, made the right connections, climbed the ladder one careful rung at a time. Along the way, he had developed certain beliefs. He believed that the world was divided into winners and losers. He believed that winners deserved their success and losers deserved their failures. He believed that poverty was, at its core, a character defect, a lack of discipline, ambition, or intelligence that no amount of government intervention could fix. The bench had been the perfect place for these beliefs. From his elevated position, he could see the parade of human weakness that passed before him daily. The addicts and the deadbeats, the people who made bad decisions and then expected the court to bail them out. The single mothers and the struggling workers and the immigrants who didn't understand how things worked in this country. He treated them all the same way, the addicts and the deadbeats, the people who made bad decisions and then expected the court to bail them out, the single mothers and the struggling workers and anyone who couldn't afford proper representation, with the contempt they deserved. Oh, he was careful. He knew how to stay within the letter of the law, how to phrase his rulings so they couldn't be easily appealed. He had been doing this for 22 years, and no one had ever successfully challenged him. No one ever would. He was untouchable. He finished his scotch, kissed his wife goodnight, and went to bed, satisfied. He did not notice the car parked at the end of his street. He did not notice that the same car had been there for 3 days now, occupied by men who never seemed to sleep. He did not notice that his life, which had seemed so secure just hours ago, had already begun to unravel. The investigation began quietly. Daniel had people for this kind of work. Not thugs, professionals. Former law enforcement officers who had learned that private sector work paid better. Forensic accountants who could read a balance sheet the way a fortune teller read palms. Private investigators who knew how to find the secrets people thought they had buried. Within a week, they had assembled a preliminary file on Judge Harold Whitmore. It was not impressive. His career had been marked by mediocrity, middling grades in law school, a string of unremarkable positions at unremarkable firms. The judgeship had been a political appointment, a favor owed to a state senator whose campaign Whitmore had supported. His rulings showed a clear pattern, favorable to corporations, hostile to individuals, especially individuals who looked like they couldn't afford to appeal. But that wasn't illegal. That was just bias. Daniel needed more. Keep looking, he told his people. Everyone has something. Find it. Emma, meanwhile, was trying to rebuild. She had come home from the courthouse that day hollow-eyed and silent. Daniel had held her, while she cried, great shuddering sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than grief. I tried so hard, she had whispered. I did everything right, and it didn't matter. It mattered to me, Daniel said. You stood up for yourself. You didn't let him break you. He did break me. You didn't see. I saw. Emma had pulled back, searching his face. You were there. He couldn't lie to her, not about this. I was there. I'm sorry. I know you asked me not to come, but I couldn't let you face that alone. Daniel. I stayed in the back. I didn't interfere. You were magnificent. I lost. The case. You lost the case, but you didn't lose yourself. There's a difference. She had looked at him for a long moment, and something had passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. What happens now? She had asked. Now you rest, you heal, and when you're ready, we figure out the next step. We can't afford, Emma. His voice was gentle, but firm. We can afford whatever we need to afford. I know you want to do this yourself. I respect that, but there are some fights that need more than one person. She had wanted to argue. He could see it in her eyes, but exhaustion won out. Okay, she said finally. We'll talk tomorrow. She had fallen asleep in his arms, and Daniel had stayed awake long into the night, planning. 3 weeks later, the first crack appeared. A woman named Sandra Mitchell walked into a legal aid clinic in the city and asked to speak with someone about Judge Harold Whitmore. The clinic was run by the same young lawyer who had been too overwhelmed to take Emma's case. Her name was Rachel Brooks, and she had been fighting an uphill battle against the system for 8 years. Sandra Mitchell was nervous. She kept glancing at the door, as if expecting someone to burst through it. "I saw a woman in Judge Whitmore's courtroom," she said, "a few weeks ago. Young woman representing herself in a civil case." Rachel nodded. She remembered Emma Sullivan. She still felt guilty about turning her away. The judge was cruel to her, mocking. He made everyone laugh at her. "I've heard similar stories about Judge Whitmore." Sandra leaned forward. "I worked for him 4 years ago. I was his clerk." Rachel's pulse quickened, but she kept her face neutral. "Go on." "The things I saw." Sandra's voice dropped. "He takes payments from lawyers, from corporations, not big amounts, nothing that would trigger audits, but regular, consistent, in exchange for favorable rulings. That's a serious accusation. I know. That's why I never said anything. I was scared. He has connections. He destroyed the last person who tried to speak out against him." "Who?" "A court reporter. She noticed some irregularities in his records, discrepancies between what was said in court and what appeared in the transcripts. She tried to file a complaint, and within a month, she had lost her job, her apartment, her marriage. They made it look like she was unstable, like she was making things up." Rachel felt sick. "Why are you coming forward now?" Sandra was quiet for a moment. "Because I saw that woman's face, the one he humiliated. And I couldn't stop thinking about all the other people he's done that to. All the cases he's decided not on the law, but on his own prejudices. All the lives he's ruined because he could." She looked up, and there were tears in her eyes. "I'm tired of being afraid, and I want to help." No one would ever know exactly how Sandra Mitchell found her courage that day. Some would say it was the viral video of Emma's court appearance, recorded illicitly by someone in the gallery and uploaded to social media, where it had garnered millions of views and sparked outrage across the country. Some would say it was the growing public pressure on the Judicial Oversight Committee to investigate claims of bias in family and civil courts. And some would say it was the anonymous letter she had received a week earlier, a letter that contained no threats, no demands, just a simple statement. "You know what he's done. Others know too. When you're ready to speak, you'll find people who will listen." The letter had been unsigned, but Sandra had a feeling deep in her bones that whoever had sent it was powerful enough to protect her. She was right. Judge Harold Whitmore first noticed that something was wrong on a Tuesday morning in April. He arrived at the courthouse to find that his usual parking spot had been taken. A minor inconvenience, surely, but strange, because he had parked in that same spot for 15 years. When he reached his chambers, his clerk, a nervous young man named Timothy, was waiting with a stack of messages. "Several calls from the Judicial Oversight Committee," Timothy said. "They want to schedule a meeting." "About what?" "They didn't say." Harold felt a flicker of unease, but he pushed it down. The Oversight Committee was a toothless body, staffed by bureaucrats who couldn't practice law if their lives depended on it. He had dealt with them before. A few carefully worded explanations, a reminder of his powerful friends, and they would leave him alone. "Schedule it for next week," he said. "I'm too busy to deal with them now." But the calls kept coming, and then the news stories started. The first article appeared in a small legal publication, the kind of thing that most people would never see. It raised questions about patterns in Judge Whitmore's rulings, noting a statistical anomaly. Cases involving certain law firms were overwhelmingly decided in their favor, regardless of the merits. Harold dismissed it as academic nonsense. But then, the city paper picked up the story, and then the national outlets. Within a week, his name was trending on social media. Hashtags called for his removal. Former defendants organized online, sharing their own stories of humiliation in his courtroom. The video of Emma Sullivan, which had been circulating for weeks, suddenly took on new significance. People watched it with fresh eyes, seeing not just a cruel judge, but a symptom of a corrupt system. His face when she tries to defend herself. He's not just ruling against her, he's punishing her for existing. Harold stopped reading the coverage. He instructed his wife to stop watching the news. He assured everyone who asked that the allegations were baseless, that his record spoke for itself, that the truth would prevail. But the walls were closing in. The formal investigation began in May. The Judicial Oversight Committee, under pressure from state legislators and advocacy groups, opened an inquiry into Judge Whitmore's conduct. They subpoenaed financial records that Harold had assumed would never see the light of day. They interviewed former clerks and court reporters, including Sandra Mitchell, who told her story with calm determination. They found discrepancies, small amounts of money flowing into accounts that Harold controlled, correlated with rulings that benefited specific parties. Not enough to prove criminal conduct, not yet, but enough to justify removing him from the bench, pending further investigation. The suspension was announced on a Friday afternoon. Harold received the news in his chambers, surrounded by the symbols of authority he had accumulated over 22 years. The diplomas, the awards, the photographs of himself with powerful people. This is temporary, he told himself. This is politics. When the truth comes out, they'll have to reinstate me. But even as he said the words, he didn't believe them. The following week, more witnesses came forward. 3 former defendants, all women, all poor, all representing themselves, testified that Judge Whitmore had mocked them in open court. 2 other judges quietly admitted to colleagues that they had heard rumors about Whitmore for years, but had been afraid to speak up. A forensic accountant hired by the Oversight Committee discovered a pattern of payments that traced back to a law firm that had appeared before Whitmore hundreds of times. The firm's partner, 2 of them had resigned, and 1 had fled the country. The story became impossible to ignore. News cameras appeared outside Harold's house. Reporters called his wife, his children, his elderly mother. Former friends stopped returning his calls. Invitations to social events were quietly rescinded. And through it all, Harold Whitmore clung to one certainty. This was a conspiracy. Someone was coordinating these attacks. Someone was pulling the strings. He just couldn't figure out who. In a quiet office across town, Daniel Carter watched the news coverage with the same patient stillness he brought to everything. He had not orchestrated all of this. He had merely facilitated it. The video had been uploaded by a witness who was angry about what she had seen. The legal aid clinic had been investigating Whitmore independently. Sandra Mitchell had found her own courage. Daniel had simply made sure that these separate threads found each other. A suggestion here. An anonymous tip there. The quiet removal of obstacles that might have kept the truth buried. Justice was flowing through the consequences of his actions without ever knowing who had set them in motion. Emma walked into the office, a cup of coffee in her hand. The committee announced their decision, she said. He's been permanently removed from the bench. They're referring the financial evidence to prosecutors for possible criminal charges. Daniel nodded. Good. Is it enough? He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the question behind the question. She wasn't asking whether the punishment fit the crime. She was asking whether he was satisfied, whether this was over. He'll spend the rest of his life knowing that his reputation is destroyed, Daniel said. Everyone who ever looked up to him will see him as corrupt and cruel. Every ruling he ever made will be questioned. Every victory he celebrated will be tainted. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city he had spent decades quietly shaping. And he'll never know why. He'll spend years trying to figure out who did this to him, and he'll never find an answer. That uncertainty will eat at him. That's what happens to men like him, men who think they're untouchable. When the ground shifts beneath them, they have nothing left to stand on. Emma was quiet for a moment. I don't feel happy, she said finally. I thought I would, but I just feel tired. Daniel turned to her. That's because you're a good person. Good people don't enjoy destruction even when it's deserved. Do you enjoy it? He considered the question honestly. No, he said. But I find it necessary. There are people in this world who use their power to hurt others because they believe no one will ever stop them. Sometimes the only way to protect the vulnerable is to show the powerful that they're not as safe as they think. He crossed the room and took her hand. He hurt you. He tried to take everything from you, and now he'll face consequences, not because someone with money and connections decided to destroy him, but because his own actions caught up with him. Everything that's happening to him, He did to himself. But you helped. I helped the truth find its way to the surface. That's all. The truth was always there. I just removed the barriers. The criminal trial took 8 months. Harold Whitmore was charged with 17 counts of corruption and judicial misconduct. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, testimony from former associates, a paper trail that stretched back years. He maintained his innocence throughout. He hired expensive lawyers, gave defiant interviews, proclaimed that he was the victim of a witch hunt. No one believed him. The verdict came on a cold morning in December, guilty on 14 counts. The sentencing would come later, but the experts agreed. He would spend years in prison. Harold stood in the courtroom, his face gray and slack, and listened as the judge, a woman he had once dismissed as too soft for the bench, read the verdict. And in the gallery, unnoticed among the reporters and spectators, Emma Sullivan sat quietly. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just watched. And when it was over, she stood up and walked out of the courthouse into the winter sunlight. Daniel was waiting for her by the car. "How do you feel?" he asked. Emma considered the question. "Like I can breathe again," she said. "For the first time in months. Like there's a weight that's been lifted." She looked back at the courthouse, that marble monument to the justice system that had failed her so completely. "It doesn't change what happened," she said. "The ruling against me still stands. I still lost my case." "There are people working on that." She turned to him, surprised. "What?" "Your original case is being reviewed. The lawyers I've spoken with believe they can get the ruling overturned, based on evidence that Judge Whitmore's bias materially affected the outcome. The bank is already negotiating a settlement. They'd rather pay than have their loan practices examined in open court." Emma stared at him. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted you to have this moment. Not mixed with other things. Just this, seeing justice done. Knowing that the man who humiliated you can't do that to anyone else ever again." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of grief or exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to thank me. You're my wife. Protecting you isn't a favor. It's my purpose." She reached up and touched his face. This man who had built an empire on patience and wielded power like a scalpel. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Daniel opened the car door for her. "Now we go home. We have dinner. We live our lives." He smiled, a real smile, warm and gentle. "That's all we've ever wanted, isn't it? Just to live our lives in peace." 1 year later, Emma stood in front of the Hillcrest County Courthouse, the same building where she had been humiliated and broken. But she was not broken anymore. The civil case had been settled 6 months ago. The bank had agreed to forgive the predatory loan in exchange for Emma's silence about their practices. A silence she had negotiated to include a substantial payment that would allow her to rebuild her business twice over. Her cleaning company now employed 12 people. She had an office, a small one, but her own. She had business cards and a website and clients who called her by name. And today she had been invited back to the courthouse. Not as a defendant this time, as a speaker. The Judicial Reform Organization had organized a conference on access to justice for self-represented litigants. They had invited lawyers and judges and policy experts to discuss how the system could be made more fair. And they had invited Emma to share her story. She had almost said no. The memories were still painful. The thought of standing in that building again filled her with dread. But Daniel had convinced her. "You have a voice now," he had said. "You didn't before. That was the problem. No one would listen. But people are listening now. You can help make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to others." So here she was, walking through those same marble halls, past those same portraits of men in black robes, into a conference room filled with people who wanted to hear what she had to say. Emma spoke for 20 minutes. She told the truth, not the sanitized version, not the version that made her look good. The truth. She talked about the shame she had felt, standing in that courtroom in borrowed clothes. She talked about the judge's cruelty, his mockery, the laughter that still echoed in her nightmares. She talked about crying in the bathroom afterwards, about going home to a husband who loved her and still feeling utterly alone. And she talked about what she had learned. I learned that the system isn't broken, she said. It's working exactly as it was designed to work. It was designed by powerful people to protect powerful people. It was designed to make people like me feel small and stupid and invisible. She looked around the room, at the lawyers shifting uncomfortably, at the judges who wouldn't meet her eyes. But I also learned something else. I learned that silence is a choice. I chose to be silent for a long time. I chose to accept what was done to me because I didn't think I had any other option. I was wrong. You don't have to be powerful to matter. You don't have to have money or connections or a law degree. You just have to tell the truth over and over again until the people who don't want to hear it can't ignore you anymore. She paused. Judge Whitmore thought I was nobody. He thought he could treat me however he wanted because no one would ever care. He was wrong. Not because I turned out to be connected to powerful people, but because my story resonated with thousands of other people who had been treated the same way. That's power, real power, the power of ordinary people who refuse to be silenced. When she finished, there was a moment of quiet. Then someone began to clap. And then someone else. And someone else. The applause built slowly, rising through the room like a wave. Emma stood at the podium, tears streaming down her face, and let herself feel something she had thought she would never feel again. Pride. Not pride in what had been done to Harold Whitmore, not pride in the settlement or the rebuilt business or any of the external victories. Pride in herself. She had survived, she had spoken out, she had turned her pain into something that might help others. And that was something no one could ever take away from her. Afterwards, as the conference room emptied and people began to file out, a young woman approached Emma. She was maybe 25, with dark hair and nervous eyes. She clutched a manila folder against her chest, a folder that looked very familiar. Miss Sullivan, I'm sorry to bother you, but I have a case next week, a civil matter. I'm representing myself because I can't afford a lawyer. Emma's heart clenched. I heard you speak, and I thought maybe you might have some advice. Emma looked at the young woman, saw the fear in her eyes, the desperate hope, the carefully concealed despair. She saw herself 1 year ago. Tell me about your case, Emma said gently, and as the young woman began to talk, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence, Emma listened, really listened, the way no one had listened to her. Later that evening, Emma told Daniel about the encounter. They were sitting on their patio, watching the sun set over the city. Daniel had a glass of wine. Emma had tea. The sounds of the neighborhood drifted up to them. Children playing, dogs barking, the ordinary music of ordinary life. I gave her my phone number, Emma said. I told her I would help her prepare, review her documents, practice her arguments. That's kind of you. It's the least I can do. Someone should have done it for me. Daniel was quiet for a moment. You know, he said, when I first met you, I thought I was going to be the one who saved you. I had this idea, ridiculous, looking back on it, that I would use my power to protect you from the world. And I was wrong. You don't need saving. You never did. You're the strongest person I know. Emma reached over and took his hand. I did need saving, she said. That day in the courtroom, when I felt like everything was crumbling around me. I needed someone to believe in me. You did that. You sat in that room and watched me fight, and when I came home destroyed, you held me and told me I was magnificent. You were. No, I was broken, but your belief helped me put myself back together. She looked at him, this complicated man, this builder of empires, this patient architect of justice. That's what love is, isn't it? Not saving each other, just believing in each other, even when we can't believe in ourselves. Daniel raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. I believe in you, he said. I always have. I always will. The evening deepened around them. In the distance, the courthouse was still visible, a dark silhouette against the darkening sky. Emma looked at it and felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, buried deep, but it had been joined by something else. Hope. The system was broken. She knew that better than anyone. It was designed to crush people like her, to silence them, to make them disappear. But systems were made of people. And people could change, one story at a time, one voice at a time. One young woman with a manila folder, standing alone before a judge, refusing to be invisible. That was the lesson of Judge Harold Whitmore. He had thought his power was absolute. He had thought his position protected him from consequences. He had forgotten the most fundamental truth of human existence. Power without humanity always collapses. It might take time. It might take patience. It might take the slow, careful work of ordinary people who refuse to accept injustice. But eventually, inevitably, it falls. And in its place, something new can grow. Something better, something that looks a little bit like